Hello. I temporally shifted the release of this show, but stuff still happened. So what's up? Hi, hello. Yeah, I shifted the release date of this show from Mondays to Thursdays. Cool. Ireland is doing a lot. Ireland is no stranger to crisis and unrest, and right now is no different. There have been large-scale protests in Ireland involving people taking heavy machinery to the streets to block roadways and oil ports and stuff like that, grinding a lot of the country to a halt and causing a general ruckus. Just some general ruckus causing. Why are they doing this? Fuel, prices, and a bunch of other stuff. There's a lot here. Let's start to unpack. Fuel prices have been spiking in Ireland, as they've been doing everywhere, but in Ireland, they've also had some tax increases, and then also now a carbon tax that's impending that's got people being like, hey, this is completely unaffordable. The war in Iran obviously is having an impact here, but also local tax policy is having an impact, and people are basically trying to say, hey, like, everything's bad right now, and they have too many taxes. Like, what are we doing about this? The history of Ireland is one of unrest and meddling in general. You know, the UK famously was fucking around in Ireland and caused it to kind of become two of them, two Irish per land. So you have a populace whose identity is rooted in not wanting to have foreign meddling again. There's also a housing crisis going on. Affordability of the housing market in Ireland is trash. Just like a lot of the EU, but in Ireland specifically, there was a period of massive growth between like 1995 and 2005. It was called the Celtic Tiger. During this time, the Irish government invested a whole lot in socially subsidized housing. People were getting houses, and they were generally affordable. And then they stopped doing that when the economy got real bad. There was this little thing called the financial crisis. It was a financial crisis. It happened in like mid-late 2000s. Kind of fucked us up. And so the government of Ireland was like, how do we save money? I know, austerity. We're just going to not do stuff and also increase taxes, but also we're going to switch to a private first housing market, just like the US. Famously affordable. And so Ireland went from building a bunch of socially subsidized housing to a primarily private market with requirements for builders to build subsidized housing, but subsidized housing dropped by like 90% after that. Shocker. When you switch to a for-profit housing model, it becomes expensive for the liver, the one living in the house. Here's a quote from Fortune magazine from 2024 regarding this situation. Quote, Ireland is severely lacking in housing stock to accommodate its swelling population. Ireland's central bank says that 52,200 homes need to be built in the country every year if supply is to keep up with demand. About a third of Irish residents are considering leaving the country as an alternative to trying to buy a house because it's so unaffordable. And I will say that if you ask a real estate CEO, for example, the CEO of Remax, they'll blame the government, saying that there's not affordable housing because it's too costly to build houses in Ireland because of permitting problems. Well, I bet there are some permitting problems, but I also have a hard time trusting the word of a real estate CEO on the topic of how to make real estate less expensive, especially when their solution is stop regulating me. There's another angle of this too, and that's immigration. If you look around the world, you'll notice that there's a handful of massive humanitarian crises. Turns out having multiple massive humanitarian crises creates refugees and immigrants, and they go places. So a lot of European countries have been absorbing immigrants from various crises, and Ireland is no different. Ireland has taken in a lot. That's undeniable. And so here in Ireland, you've got unrest over the fuel prices and the taxes and whatnot. You've got a housing economy that is just unworkable for the average person. And then you have a ton of migration, and that creates a hotbed for right-wing opportunists to be like, hey, those immigrants are causing your problems. I am not an Irish citizen. I am not an expert in the Irish economy. Everything that I have read from people who are experts in the Irish economy says that this was a problem long before the migration increase over the past years. So it is quite opportunistic to finger point at the migrants for being the problem when that's not the problem. Could be making it worse, not the root cause. And so there's several white nationalist and self-described neo-Nazi groups in Ireland vying for more political power during this moment, using this crisis to get people on their side. It's gross, but thankfully, Ireland is pretty resilient from having people in the most fringe areas of politics get lifted up into seats of power. Again, not an expert, but my understanding is that to get into the Irish Parliament, it takes a lot more than just getting enough votes. You actually have to get a certain percentage of votes within a geographical region to even have a chance of getting on the board. And on top of that, it's ranked choice voting. So there's like multiple mechanisms in place to prevent extremely fringe ideology from being uplifted, especially by accident. By accident being like, oh, the vote was split like 7 ways, and the person with the most votes, with 26% of the vote, was John Racism of the Racism Party. At the end of the day, the people of Ireland are tired, and they've got a right to be so. I think we're all pretty tired, but after spending quite a bit of time reading up on Irish history, y'all definitely have the right to be tired. A recent column on the Irish Times talked about how there is a growing sense of disaffection in the country and people are just checked out emotionally from just crisis after crisis after crisis. It's gone from like, oh my God, we need to react to, oh, it's a crisis. Yeah, that's standard. What's for dinner? The good news is the Irish government has already responded a little bit. It hasn't quelled the protests and made everybody happy, but they're doing a little bit of work to be like, hey, we're going to tamp down on those taxes for a bit, try to make things slightly more affordable. It's not enough. Hopefully there will be more. Hang in there, folks of Ireland. Solidarity. Some elections happened. The headlining one was in Hungary. This is the big one. Viktor Orban was finally unseated as Prime Minister of Hungary after 16 years in power, ending what was effectively a dictatorial reign. The dude is like Hungarian Trump, basically. He just consolidated power, just put everybody around him as a yes man, and did everything he could to undermine free speech and media in Hungary. He is a darling of the American right. It's fucking weird. It's actually not fucking weird. Turns out, Hungary has been bankrolling CPAC. The new presumed PM of Hungary came in and was like, hey, so we found records of transactions of Orban funding CPAC. Which explains a lot about why CPAC was having CPAC Hungary sessions. So yeah, weird that there's a whole bunch of people on the American right that are like, wow, we just love Viktor Orban in Hungary. We love him for no reason whatsoever. We're going to send JD Vance over there to stump for him. And then when he loses, Orban lost spectacularly. The incoming party is getting like 2/3 of the seats in parliament. And they're not a conservative party. That said, the type of conservative party they are is more of like a, let's have a stable country and communicate with our allies around us and have checks and balances. Not perfect by any means, but also not actively antagonizing the rest of NATO and the EU and supporting Russia and saying fuck you to Ukraine. It's a change. It's a meaningful change. In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney is sitting pretty as his Liberal Party now has a majority in the Canadian government. In a parliamentary government, you're usually ruling by coalition. You've got a party that's the biggest, but not a majority, and they find a couple other parties to work with, and that group governs. This is just the Liberals got it. Carney says this is a good thing because now they'll be able to pass legislation more quickly. He might have a point considering that Trump, who is not a legislator, somehow legislates by tweet from the toilet in the middle of the night. Might be useful to be able to respond to that relatively quickly. But in general, a parliamentary system is supposed to have more of a coalition going on to represent the people in general. But the headlining thing here is that the Conservative Party of Canada got trounced more. Meanwhile, stateside, it's not elections, but a Democrat and a Republican, both in Congress, have resigned for sex pest stuff. California Representative Eric Swalwell and Texas Representative Tony Gonzalez have both resigned, like within 24 hours of each other. Eric Swalwell, who was a hopeful for California governor, was hit with a bunch of allegations of sexual assault and having affairs with his staffers, and he denied them at first, and then he pulled out of the California governor race, and then he's resigning from Congress now. I wonder if the allegations were accurate. As for Tony Gonzalez, he is leaving Congress after previously saying he won't, after it came out that he had an affair with a woman who later was reported to have died by suicide. So yeah, he's gone. Concept, just spitballing. Don't sexually assault people. You can have that one for free. If you don't pay your employees enough to live, your warehouse burns down. That's history. Throughout the entirety of the labor movement in the United States and beyond, a lot of the progress that has been made to help make workers' lives better has been because of violent action. PBS has a wonderful article that documents a whole bunch of instances of real live fire ammunition battles between workers and private security forces, and in some cases, public security forces, like the National Guard. They refer to them as labor wars, and that's a very accurate title. When the owning class gets to the point that they refuse to even negotiate with their workers, the ones who produce the value, and those workers are barely able to feed themselves, the workers are going to respond with the one thing they have: direct action. Anyway, a bunch of warehouses have been burned down in the US recently. On April 7th, a Kimberly-Clark paper products warehouse in California was set ablaze allegedly by an employee who posted a video, allegedly, saying, if you pay us enough to live, this wouldn't have happened. Allegedly. Since then, we've seen a warehouse fire at least once a day. Like, it's kind of wild. Here is a non-exhaustive list, and I will say, as I was trying to find a list of all of the warehouse fires that have been going on around the US, there are some that I can actually confirm, and there's a lot that are just sourced from random social media posts. So stay frosty. That said, it's still a lot of warehouse fires. On April 7th, there was the one that started the whole shebang. On April 8th was a warehouse fire at an Amazon warehouse. They say that was caused by a solar panel malfunction and not arson. April 9th, warehouse fire in New Jersey. It's not announced what the actual cause is, but the arson unit is investigating. April 10th, warehouse fire in New York, and another fire in California, actually in the same place as the original fire. The one in New York is under investigation. The one in California is actually arson. They've already said this is a copycat. The idea here is to inflict pain on the employers for not treating workers fairly for so long. It's also a last resort. It's not like a normal person in a good mood of sound mind and body with their needs being met is going to just go burn down a warehouse. This is the breaking point. I've seen a common response from a lot of people who are concerned about the other workers of the warehouses. Like, oh, well, what about the other workers? Now they're out of a job. Haha, you didn't really do workers' rights. I understand the impulse to be like, no, don't do the violence. That's bad. I get it. I truly do. I would again point to the very, very long, well-documented history of having to hold these people to the fire, sometimes literally, in order to actually make progress. We didn't get the weekend from good graces. Hundreds of people died across the country fighting the National Guard, also that we could have a 5-day work week and 2-day weekend with 8-hour work days. That was the compromise. A warehouse doesn't have a whole lot of staff. If it's not a logistics hub and it's just like a storage and shipping warehouse, it's not going to have a ton of people working there. This warehouse fire is not going to put half the town out of business, but it sure as hell makes a statement. All right, quick update on Iran/Lebanon. The US and Israel war on Iran and Lebanon is still doing the thing. It's still happening. Still doesn't need to be happening. Iran has been blockading the Strait of Hormuz, and now in response to their blockade, the US is blockading the Strait of Hormuz. So what's actually happening here? I want to explain this because it does sound ridiculous, but I would say it makes sense, but it still doesn't make sense. These aren't literal physical blockades. There's not a line of ships preventing ships from crossing through. What's happening is the space is being monitored. The ships have GPS and like tracking devices, and there are logs for where ships are coming from, going to, what country they're flagged in, all that stuff. So as ships are going through the strait, they're being monitored. And if they are coming from a place or going to a place that is not liked by either Iran or the US, that respective military is going to jump on that ship and be like, stop it. So it's like a blockade by threat, more or less. It's like we are in position to blockade. We are in position to intercept. And it may happen. It's probably going to happen before I post this video, but that's what these blockades are. But while we have this sort of water polo standoff, Israel has been pounding Lebanon with hundreds of airstrikes. At least 800,000 people in Lebanon have been displaced as Israel continues to invade. There have been reports of more use of white phosphorus bombs over residential areas by Israel, which is what we've seen before when they went into Lebanon and what we've been seeing in Gaza this whole time. The white phosphorus can cause widespread fires. It can destroy farmland for years. So I'm not particularly shocked that they're doing this again in Lebanon. It has become increasingly clear that Iran is like, hey, US, if you want this ceasefire to hold, they got to stop this shit. Israel is not particularly interested in stopping, considering they were the ones that goaded the US into being a part of this in the first place. As of now, talks continue. There's not really any major progress towards the end of this war, aside from Trump saying every other day that either the war is about to end or Iran's about to end. So, see you next week on that lightning round. The Artemis 2 moon mission landed back down on Earth safe and sound. All of the astronauts are home and with their various families and dogs. That's sweet. Citing his literal years of spreading Nazi propaganda and releasing a song literally titled Hail Hitler last year, the UK prevented Kanye West from coming to headline a music festival. A former employee at Facebook wrote a script that downloaded 30,000 private user images from their services undetected. Facebook has super fired him and said that they're going to alert the people who were affected, and he's also being investigated. Hey, don't do that. And finally for today, Eric Adams, the former mayor of New York City, got himself Albanian citizenship and an Albanian passport because... Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Stuff Keeps Happening. Head to skh.news for sources, bonus content, and the paperwork to get your own Albanian citizenship. My name is Endeavorance. We'll talk again soon. Take care and be well.